A circle or square is placed in each location in the grid below. Shown below is an example of 3 squares in a line. Essentially, that line right there. How many configurations have 3 circles and 3 squares in a line? Well, 3 circles in a line would look something like that with a circle instead of a square. Now, they could be flipped to rows. In fact, the rows would be the mirror image of the columns. And there's no restriction on going diagonally, except I can't have a square diagonal and a circle diagonal together because they'd intersect in the middle, and that wouldn't work. So let's go ahead and count the ways we can arrange a line of squares and a line of circles. I would start with my squares on the left, and then I could have my circles. And then my third column would essentially be a mixture of squares and circles. I'm going to try and stay organized, keep my squares on the left at first. I could then have that mixture column and then the circles. That's another option. Okay. Alternatively, at this point, I probably have to move my squares into the middle, where I could have the circles on the left and the mixture on the right, or my squares in the middle with the mixture column on the left and the circles on the right. And last but not least, we can move our squares off to the right side, where I could have my circles and my mixture column, or on the right side with my mixture column next to the squares and my circles off on the left. So in total, we can see we have 6 ways to arrange the 2 different columns of a line of squares and a line of circles. But wait a second, we're definitely not finished here. I need to figure out within each of the mixture columns of squares and circles, how many mixtures can I create for each of those columns? And for every of those 6 ways, we see we've got a column of mixtures. So we're going to have to multiply by that number of ways. Let's figure out what that is. Well, I could have 0 circles. I could have 1 circle, 2 circles, or 3 circles, which is basically 0 squared. So those are my only options I have to count for. If I had 0 circles, that would just be square, square, square. On the other extreme, if I had 3 circles, it would be circle, circle, circle. And then if it were, say, 1 square, it might look square, circle, circle. But I can arrange that a couple different ways. My square, if it's only 1 square, could be in the middle row or the bottom row. And likewise, if there were 1 circle, not 2, well, I would have 2 squares in that same row, in that same column. And I could put my circle in the middle or the last place in the column, in which case my squares would fit in the rest. These are basically all the scenarios or outcome. So I have 6 ways to mix them up with either 1 or 2 squares per column. That's the same thing as 1 or 2 circles as well, since they're, again, mirror images of each other. And then I have 2 ways, it looks like, of putting in squares and circles. But here's where it gets a little tricky. I think we need to be careful about this. If I make my mixture column circles, 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 as in this case, that means I can't put circles, circles, circles over here. Why? Because circle, 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 these would essentially be the same scenario. So actually what I have to do, I have to make my next case, if the first one's circle, 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 the next case must be all squares. So that means for each of these 2 cases, I have +2 to count. Well, that's going to be true on our next row with all the squares in the middle. There will be +2 counts. 1 column could be all squares, but the other column would have to be all circles again to avoid that repetition. And then +2 here, which means I've got 6 ways more that I have to add. So what is this in total? I have essentially 6 ways to organize my columns. And for each of those 6 ways, so that's 6 times 6 equals 36. And for the columns that are all squares or all circles, I have +6 more ways for the all squares or all circle columns along with everything else in the mixture column. That means in total I have 42 arrangements or ways in all, 4 columns. For rows, it's the same thing. So I could duplicate this, which means 2 times 42. My final answer should be 84 ways, or 84 configurations of 3 circles and 3 squares in a line. That's a good one. Gets a little tricky. We've got to be careful about how to arrange those sort of mixed columns along with everything else.